Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Well, hello there. This is Zoe Routh, your friendly neighborhood leadership expert and host of the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. This show, if you're a first-time listener, welcome. If you're a repeat listener, welcome too. I'm so pleased that you've turned your ears on once again to listen to our interviews. Now, if you have been listening for a while, you can hear it in my voice. I sound a bit funny. Yep, I've come down with a cold. It's not COVID. I've tested out the wazoo, and I've still managed to dodge the bullet on that one. So no COVID for me, but a terrible head cold, which meh. So I'll hopefully be back to my usual peppy self in our next interview. But for today, I'm a little bit croaky. In the meantime, though, we have a fabulous guest who is not at all croaky. Her name is Eudora Pascall. And in listening to this interview, the question I want you to ponder, as I did throughout, is how do you run a team? How do you run a company when everyone is equal? It's actually central to the whole premise of holacracy, the topic we've been exploring this quarter in Amplifiers and also on the podcast. Holacracy, the where we get rid of hierarchy and develop self-managed teams. Now, Eudora is not a practitioner of holacracy, and yet she has some of the similar principles in her leadership ethos and her background as a Quaker, which is fascinating. So I dove right in on that one because I don't know much about Quakers, and it was fascinating to hear about how they apply the principle of equality in their leadership and team practices. And it has direct application in how we run our teams and our businesses too. So about Eudora, she is the co-founder of Heart in Business and the co-author of Putting the Heart Back into Business. She has a number of different degrees, which include... I'm just leaning forward because my glasses and my eyeballs don't reach far enough to the computer to read it. And I want to make sure I get her university degrees correct. She is a master's in organizational and individual change, cultural behavior, and economics. So she is well educated and well versed in all things people. And I think what you'll find in listening to the conversation that she has a big heart, and she really puts the leader, the individual, at the heart of running effective business. And that when we tune in and become authentically real, vulnerable to every part of ourselves, the rough bits and all, we create a safe place for organizations and teams and individuals to thrive. So that's what we're talking about today. And without further ado, on with the show. Okay, all the way from Germany, welcome to the show, Eudora Pascall.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. I love your name just rolls off the tongue like a song.
Oh,
Eudora Pascall. So I was pretty happy to be able to introduce you. And I think that's sort of apt, really, because the topic that you are fascinated with, and I'm so excited to bring to the show today, is putting the heart back into business. And that's the name of your new book. So how did you come about to write this book? Tell us the journey of you, your work, and then this book.
Right. Well, actually, Andrew started writing the book. I wasn't involved initially. And as he was writing it, and it's something that's very important to him, I started thinking, okay, this is all very well, but he's just speaking from his perspective, sort of the white male perspective in business. And it was during COVID, and I was aware that a lot of people were writing their books. And I just thought, how many white male perspective books will there be out there or coming out all about business? And I said to him, look, Andrew, you have to write this in a different way because this is not real. This is not you. You know, you own a supermarket that's very international. There are so many people from all over the world. That needs to be kind of portrayed in the book, and the ordinariness of what you're doing, which is what is extraordinary, rather than this other perspective. And he said, you're right. So invited me to help write this book and to kind of give that perspective of the fact that this is an ordinary, get your hands dirty business that we're using as our example, as our kind of where we did all our sort of testing and experimenting and development and found our findings. I mean, we worked for other organizations as well, but that's sort of the starting point. And making it just real, because the reason we've written this book is that it's a practical, hands-on book that everybody and anyone can use, whether they're in business and even if they're not. But actually, it's just sort of a practical, how do you kind of be more clear about your purpose, your direction, and make a change?
Okay, so rewind a little bit. Who's Andrew?
Yes, good point.
Who's Andrew and what's the business that you're talking about?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I just jumped right in there. So Andrew is my life partner, but also my business partner. And we founded Heart in Business quite a number of years ago, and basically wanted to have a different approach to business by sort of a much more heartful approach. I come from a background of having been or am a Quaker. So for me, business and the sort of way that the Quakers do business was very important to me. And I can say a bit more about that.
Oh, we definitely want to hear about that.
Yes. And Andrew came from a background of owning 2 supermarkets and sort of the struggles of how to own 2 supermarkets in a very competitive world. So we came together, me with much more of a coaching, how to change organizations background, in him kind of, hands on the ground, kind of how do you make a change in the supermarket? And we kind of got together that way.
Yeah. How does that even work? How does a Quaker get together with a supermarket business owner? Like, what's that?
Yeah. So basically, I mean, it kind of happened, both things happened at the same time. So we got together relationship wise and work wise sort of around the same time. How does it happen? I don't know. Stepping several steps back, I was, at the time that I met Andrew, I was a single mum who was holding down 2 jobs and, as you can imagine, spending a lot of time just surviving. And a dear friend of mine said, look, this is all well and good, but you need to get out more. So we, he took me out one evening to an event, and Andrew was the one who opened the door. And as soon as I saw him, I had that kind of, a little kind of boom moment, or something happened, and I just went, oh, he's the one.
Good grief.
I know. It helped that he was wearing a purple velvet jacket, and I think that sort of kind of helped the situation. But he was actually in a relationship, so I thought, oh, okay, this is the sort of person I'd like to be with, but not him because he's in a relationship. So we were friends for 2 years, and in that time, we worked a lot together. We did a lot of sort of workshops and things like that. And I just thought, it's just great working with this guy. He gets me. I get him. It's just easy. And 2 years later, that same friend said, look, you're both single now. You both really like each other. Just get on the phone, have a date. And we did, and we haven't looked back. And we just really enjoy working together, living together, parenting together, because he's adopted my daughter. And it's just sort of happened. I guess, like the expression goes, life happens when you're so busy making plans. So, it just sort of happened.
Okay. So that's weaving in Andrew,
yes.
The romance. How does your faith feed into the business enterprise and to your relationship?
Yes. So Quakers, and I don't know how much you know about them, but they were...
Assume that we know nothing.
Right. So basically, if you know sort of Cadbury's, Roundtree, those sort of big companies, they're Quaker companies, and they were founded on Quaker principles. And Quakers are about no hierarchy, about equality, about all of us being equal in the eyes of whatever you call it. So Quakers don't necessarily say God. They can say spirit, they can say Mother Earth, whatever. But we are all equal, and we all have a direct connection to whatever it is. And that's how they run businesses. So they say that everybody within the business is equal, i.e. hierarchy is not the important bit within a business. So when they make decisions, it's about everybody making a decision together so that everybody is in agreement and kind of moving forward together.
Well, that sounds exactly like holacracy, which is our theme for this quarter.
Yes, exactly. So when you mentioned holacracy to me, I thought, oh, gosh, yes, no, I know that well, because that is basically how Quakers do business.
Okay, so you have to explain that, right? So how does that work in practical terms? So when you think about a large corporations such as Cadbury's Roundtree, I'm like, wow, that's a pretty big multinational. How do you not have hierarchy to run an operation like that? How does it work day to day?
Yes. So, I mean, just to be clear, Roundtree and Cadbury's are not Quakers anymore. They were, but they've been bought and bought and bought. How it works is that you basically you set up a way of decision making that everyone is part of, that everyone feels able to speak, to share, what they feel about something, so they don't feel frightened, they don't feel as though they can't say something. But there's a culture of every voice being important. So, a few hundred years ago when Cadbury's was starting, it was very much about, okay, the workers need to have proper housing, proper education, their families need to be well cared for so that they show up at work the best way they can. And part of that was, and we need to listen to them. We need to listen to what's going on for them. So it's that sort of approach. So it's throughout the whole organization, from the beginning, the saying hello, right to the end of saying goodbye.
So how do you make a decision, though, if every voice is heard and you have dissenting voices? Is it a consensus-based practice or is it a consultative-based practice?
Yes. I mean, there are different ways depending on the organization. But for example, just last weekend, all the Quakers in Britain and Ireland met up, as in all the ones who wanted to come along, those that were busy didn't, to make decisions. And they did it a mixture online and real. And what they do is they put a situation forward and they explain as much information as they can about a particular situation that needs a decision. And then in that place, there's a silence and a type of meditation, a type of reflection where people sit, sometimes even uncomfortable silence, sitting with the uncomfortableness of, okay, I need to make a decision. How do I feel about it? It's not always the easiest of decisions. And they sit in that and listen to what feels to be the right decision to make. So listening to whatever you call it, that something bigger, God or Spirit or Mother Earth or whatever you call it, and listen to what feels right. And if at that point you feel moved to speak, to say something about that decision, about what's going on, then you stand up and you say something and share it with everybody. Then there's more silence and people think about it and reflect. How do they sit with it? What feels to be the right decision? And strangely enough, because it sounds impossible, but strangely enough, they come to a decision. So sitting in that uncomfortable silence connected to something bigger, the right decision emerges. And that's basically the way that Quaker businesses operate. They'll do it in slightly different ways depending on how they are and who they are. But it's that trusting in something bigger than themselves and sitting in that uncomfortable silence so that the answer emerges. So not being afraid to wait and listen.
It's very intuitive and organic, it sounds, as opposed to very structured and process-driven.
Well, so yes. And what's interesting is that they have the intuitive organic part, but they also have the structure. So they make sure that there's proper minutes done afterwards and that there are proper processes and proper structures in place for that organic, intuitive part to exist. And actually, that's why Quakers still exist today, because they're very hot on the structure and the process to leave space for the organic and the intuitive.
Wow, that's an interesting paradox. So in terms of, there's the structure and process of documentation. So let's actually, this is really fascinating from a group process point of view. So what are the kinds of structures and processes that allow that listening, that deep intuitive stuff to arise? And it's a cultural thing as well, because you talked a little bit about Quakers cultivate the culture of everybody's voice is equal and important. So can you tell us a little bit about the structures and process that enable that sense of trust and vulnerability to exist?
Yes. So the structures and processes around how to make decisions are very clear. That it's important to put as much information forward as possible before the decision is made, that people can read that, listen to it, assimilate it, and that there's space for questions so that people know, actually what they're looking at, what the premise is. And that's very clear. And it's very clear that there are two people who hold the space. So they are called clerks or servants of that meeting, of that decision-making process. And why servants is that they see themselves very much as, so within Quakers, they don't have a CEO. They have a clerk who's basically the servant of the Quakers, whose job is to listen, to hold space, to create structure, to listen. And so with the decision-making process, those two people are holding space for the whole meeting so that the meeting feels safe to make that decision. So they're given enough information. They know the structure. They know that they can be listened to. There's space for that connection to something bigger. And those two people make sure that that is properly held in a safe way and that there is enough space for the uncomfortable silence. So that's an example of how the decision's made, if that makes sense. And then obviously that everything is properly minuted afterwards and agreed and signed off, because that's what's important. You know, if you're going to make a decision, then it needs to be properly agreed, signed off.
Yep. So the clerks who hold the space and ensure that the process is upheld and so on, are they facilitating the meeting or the process?
Yes and no. They and again, you can go on proper training to do this because it's not easy. So people who hold this role, and anyone can hold it. And that's the beauty again of Quakers. So I could hold that position as anyone else could be. You are nominated to do so. And it's regularly, every 3 years, you change who does this. So everybody within Quakers can have a chance to do every role. It's slightly different with the head of the Quakers. That's done in a slightly different process, but it's fairly similar. But the holding is really a listening. So that intuitive listening to the meeting. Have they got what the topic is about, what the decision is? And that, again, that uncomfortable place of people being able to speak, share what's coming up for them and sitting in that silence and being able to intuitively master when more information needs to be said, when a draft minute needs to be put forward that people can think about, because they put one forward and then everybody thinks about it. And I mean, you have to think there are, you can have 1,000 people in the room making this decision. Plus, this year there were a lot more online. So it's a real art form and mastery of knowing when the moment is to put a draft minute forward, listening whether people agree, whether they need something changed. So you're listening to the meeting, to the direction that it's going.
Does it take a lot of time?
Yes and no. So actually, surprisingly, not that much time, because the people who hold the space know how to do it so that they can be as efficient as is needed, so as not to take so much time, but still get to the right answer. So again, it's that uncomfortable, okay, we need to give it space, but we need to also do it in an efficient way, because Quakers, for example, last weekend met for 4 days. They had a lot of decisions to make. So, there were lots and lots of different topics that were looked at.
Can you give me an example of the kind of decisions they were making? I'm just curious now.
Yes. Well, so Quakers go out into the world and they do sort of quite a lot of active work. So they will have been looking at the work that they do overseas in different countries and decisions about where they're going to go, what type of work they're going to do. Then also they do work in Britain. So they'll be looking at sort of social housing within Britain and what they're doing with that, or they advise the government on certain matters, how they're doing that. Because Quakers are involved in so many different areas, it's getting that clarity about which direction they're going, what they want to be doing, where they are the most effective, because it's about using their money wisely and using their skills wisely. So people often say about Quakers that they punch above their weight, because whatever program they do, they make sure that it's really effective.
So Quakers are a faith and an organization like any other religious institution?
Yes, they are an NGO as well as so they're a faith and an NGO, a charity who does lots of work. And I actually worked for them before doing the work that I do now, working for Heart and Business.
Okay. So thank you so much. This is really fascinating.
Yes, pleasure.
So the company that you co-founded, Heart in Business, so is this a Quaker-based organization, or is that separate to your faith?
Yes. It's not a Quaker-based organization in the sense that it's not Quaker, but nothing is separate to my faith, in the sense that when you're a Quaker, and in a sense this is quite annoying, you're a Quaker not just on Sunday but for 1 hour, you're a Quaker all the time. It runs in everything I do. So in everything I do, every way that I am connected to something bigger. And actually we talk a lot about that in Heart and Business, that connection to your purpose and to something bigger. So it's fundamental to who I am.
And we'll turn to talk about your book in just a moment. Is your husband also a Quaker? Was that a prerequisite or not a prerequisite?
No, he's not. I mean, he agrees with the principles, and he himself does a lot of meditation. So Quakers, they, in a sense, meditate together as a group. And he does a lot, sort of, meditates every morning when he gets up and that sort of thing. So he agrees with the principles, and the book talks a lot about, and that's why it's called Putting the Heart Back into Business, because we feel that it was there before with Quaker organizations, but he isn't one, and that is not important to me at all. And he's not my husband, just as
beg your pardon.
No, that's absolutely fine. It's, we both have been, and again, that sort of brought us together. We both have been married before and both had children and divorced, even though we didn't want to, in the sense, who wants to get divorced? And a lot of our work is based on that, on how life happens, and it doesn't always happen in the way you want it, as in, there are stones and difficulties on the way of life, and how do you respond to it? How are you with those difficulties?
So let's talk about the principles in putting the heart back into business. What are the key principles that you want readers to walk away with from this book?
For me, if there's nothing else that people walk away with, for me, what I really would love is that people realize that they can be authentic, that it is okay to be who they really are and show up fully as themselves in the world. And part of that is to have a clear purpose, a clear direction of where you're going, and also to become aware of the knots that are stopping you from stepping really into who you are. So we all have lots of knots and difficulties that have happened to us. And sadly, a lot of those stop people from really being themselves because of what they've experienced. And if nothing else, that's what I want people to walk away with, that there is a way through those knots, those difficulties, so that you can really discover yourself and you're fully who you really are.
So that's a very individual process. You're suggesting that can happen in the container of an organization? Yes.
I think that it's essential. So I think that there's that sort of individual process and the organization's process. So it's become very clear that organizations with a purpose, who have a direction, who know where they're going, actually retain staff, teams, people, and people want to work for them, want to stay there. And it just makes a much clearer organization. And then organizations who have not only a purpose, but also who enable people who work for them to be authentic, to show up authentically, get a lot more from their organization. As in, people want to work there, they do their best, they work that much harder, and they come up with more ideas and so on, because they can really be themselves. So it's seen to work.
One of the things that you mentioned is the company, how to make a company a safe place to encourage that authentic self-expression. In practical terms, how do you go about doing that? Because there's a lot of conversation about this, psychological safety and having workplaces be safe places. What do you advise in that regard?
That it's not a tick box exercise. I think that a lot of people, they say, okay, right, let's just make it safe. Okay, so we'll say the right things and do what we should do, and then it'll be safe. And we humans do actually know if we are in a safe place or not. We don't need to be told we are. We can just feel it. And I can say that I can say that safely because when I run workshops, when I coach people, when people feel safe, they just know they feel safe and they say, oh, yes, I feel safe. And they actually say it out loud, and they do, and they share, and they are vulnerable, and they are open. If people are not, you can just see that they're not, and they know that they're not. And it stands out a mile in their body language, in what they share, and who they are. So psychological safety and creating a safe organization is not about tick boxing. It's really living it. So you as a leader, are you authentic? Are you being vulnerable yourself? Are you living what you stand for? Are the words that you say and your actions and how you really are living, are they all in alignment? And if they are, then the people who work for you will just know it, will smell it, will feel it, and will then behave accordingly, i.e. they will feel safe to be more authentic.
Do you find that there's sometimes power games that arise regardless, though, in these types of organizations? So one of the things that I've seen, you might have a great leader who's authentic and vulnerable, etc. And then you have other people in the organization who are at different stages of their leadership maturity and are still vying for status and vying for control and vying for power. How do you see that play out in this kind of organization? Do those people end up getting moved on, or can they get integrated? How does it scupper the sense of feeling safe?
Brilliant question. And actually, I'll go straight back to me first and just say, I am not perfect. I mess up all the time. And I can, say the wrong thing to the wrong person and probably get caught up in games. So this is not a book. And this work that we do is not about us saying that we are perfect and we have all the answers. It's about giving practical tools and knowledge so that we can start to make changes. So I will continue to mess up, but at least I can try to be the best of myself every day. And that's the same for organizations. So a leader who is authentic, really living what they say, what they mean, what they stand for, and living their purpose, will mess up. And it's about being able to say, I'm sorry, I messed up today. I didn't show up in the best way. I will try again. So it's owning that. And within an organization, there are people who will struggle to be vulnerable, who will struggle to show up as themselves, rightly so, because of their past experiences, because it doesn't feel safe, because of 101 different reasons why they don't. And it's giving them the tools and creating that culture where people feel safe to have a go and try. And it won't be perfect. And there will be people who don't want to be part of this, but it's trying and it's working it through and using those skills and tools. And it could be that some people say, no, this is too real for me. I don't want to be in this organization. And they may choose to leave, or they may change. They may suddenly realize, oh, this is what it feels like to feel safe. This is what it feels like to be authentic, and make a step towards it, and then another one, in the little steps each day.
Do you think that such an organization depends heavily on having the leader model the way, or are there practices that can substitute for a less than perfect leader?
Well, actually, do you know, I don't know about you, but even with my friends, I don't want anyone to be perfect. So actually having a leader, and my favorite leaders are the ones who mess up, but say that they do and are willing to grow and learn and apologize from their mistakes. I feel much safer around imperfect leaders who are trying their best to be authentic and live what they stand for. The ones who say, I've got it, I know all the answers and I'm perfect, that's where I worry. So it's actually in the imperfection, in the messing up, that an organization becomes stronger, and that a culture becomes stronger and can feel much more palpable, because we all do. And I think that it is difficult for an organization to be authentic, to be purposeful, to be heartful if the leader is not showing vulnerability and authenticity and heartfulness and standing for those things. I think that it makes it much harder. It can happen, but it's harder.
I think I agree with you there. One of the things you also mentioned, Eudora, is the love word.
Yes.
And how people are still allergic to that in workplaces. Why is that? And why should we bring love back into the workplace?
Well, I'd be the first to admit that I also feel very uncomfortable with the love word because of, all that sort of social, all that sort of media, all that sort of stuff, that baggage that we all carry about what does love mean. And it's kind of understanding your relationship with that love word and realizing in love, we only think of love, or often we only think of it in a sort of romantic way. But actually, if you go back to the Greeks, they had at least 4, if not 7, different words for love. And love is actually all about connection, those exchanges between different people. And depending on who those people are, then you have a different word for that love. So there's the romantic love between a partner, but then you have the sort of parent-child love, and you have one with friends and then with colleagues, etc.
Okay. So we can have different versions of that connection / love existing in business. How would you like to see it talked about in the workplace?
I guess about connection. And connection for me is about vulnerability, sharing things that matter to you with somebody else, because that creates, it's through vulnerability, through connection, that there is that sort of love that happens.
That's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
So tell me a little bit more, one last thing about the book, Putting the Heart Back into Business. When people finish reading the book and put it down, what can they start doing immediately?
So immediately, in a sense, we're not wanting people to just read the book. Within the book, there are already lots of activities, lots of sort of over to you moments. Have a go, look at it, look at this book and the ideas that we've put forward. How does that play out in your life? So immediately, it's for everyone to look at their own lives, perhaps the organization they work for or the organization that they're in, because the first organization we ever were in, all of us, was our family, the family we were born in. That's our first organization. And just notice what's going on and noticing who you are in relation to those, all the organizations you are part of, including your family, and how you want to show up.
Oh, that's a powerful question. It's lovely.
Thank you.
Do you have, apart from your own fabulous book, do you have a favorite book that has inspired you or a podcast that has?
Yes. I mean, there are lots of different books that inspire me. Here's one that I really found tricky and didn't want to read, but changed my life. And that is The 5 Choices. And it's about the structure of how to structure your life so that you can lead an extraordinary life and be much more productive. And initially, being a much more intuitive person, I really didn't like the book because I just thought, no, I don't want, why do I need structure and so on? But actually it's changed my life because annoyingly, I discovered that by having habits and by having, as in good habits, and having some structure, there is much more space for intuition, for innovation, for reflection. So yes, so I would say that book, even though it's
called The 5 Choices. And who is the author?
It is done by whenever I'm asked about books and names, I just worry that I'll get a blank, and then I do get a blank. But it's I think Covey Institute. So it was written by several authors, and yes, I can send you the details.
That's all right. We'll make sure that the link is in the show notes.
Yes, brilliant. Yes, and I'm sorry, that is one thing that that happens. I have a very good memory and can remember many things, but names, books, and titles, I just get a blank.
No worries. Eudora, this has been really fascinating. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your background, your expertise, and your experience as a Quaker and as a passionate workplace love machine. Wait a minute. Should we describe you that way?
I really don't mind. However you want to describe me, but thank you. It's been really fascinating, and I've loved the questions because, yeah, you've got me thinking in a different way. I just, when people ask questions and you respond, it's like, oh yes, of course. No, that. And so thank you as well, because I certainly will be thinking about things in a different way after today.
Well, thank you. I hope your afternoon or the rest of your day in Germany goes fabulously well. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Take care.
Well, I found Eudora absolutely delightful to talk with, and she has such a gentle nature, and I loved her insights and focus on really valuing other human beings. I think the thing that will stick with me the most from our conversation is the picture of 1,000 people, both online and in a room, the Quakers, sitting and allowing space for the uncomfortable silence to process what is the right path through connecting to something greater than ourselves. And I don't hear this enough in conversations with leaders about accessing the higher self voice and to really allowing spirit, whatever you want to call it, to inform a lot of our decisions. Maybe it's because people are private about that, or maybe because they don't practice it enough. And I'm certainly guilty of that, I think. Guilty is a terrible word. So let me rephrase that a little bit. I'd like to practice that more. I like to practice sitting in silence and allowing the answer to emerge as I connect with the divine around me. And I see the divine in all living things and all of creation. I don't have a religion. I am spiritual, and I love to feel connected to the life force that brings us such joy, because we're here on the planet for such a short time. And being sick, you really come to pay attention to those things. Well, if you enjoyed the show, please give us a shout out. Feel free to write us a comment. Email me, Zoe at Zoe Routh. It makes this way more of a conversation, and I love hearing from listeners. It's always a delight and a pleasure to hear what you gained from the conversations. This episode, like the whole show, is brought to you by Amplifiers, which is our advanced leadership training program for CEOs, general managers, and senior executives who want to make bigger impact. And we focus on honing your leadership skills in leading change, leading strategy, leading culture, and leading performance. This quarter, we have a free introductory webinar, if you like. And well, it's not actually introductory. It's what we're talking about is advanced leadership skills when it comes to leading strategy. So leading strategy, a lot of organizations are reviewing and refining their strategy given the global changes around us. And now is a really good time to make sure that you've got the fundamentals in place and that you are doing a thorough job of looking at your strategy. Most leaders I speak to feel pretty confident in their ability to lead strategy, and yet I find in conversation with them, there are a few holes in terms of how they're approaching it. So this is a good way to come along and check us out for free. It's happening on July 19th. That's Tuesday, July 19th at 8:30 a.m. Canberra Eastern Standard Time. It will be recorded. You will have access to the recording for a week. And you can sign up at our website, zoerouth.com, click on programs and events, and that'll take you through the registration page. So that's what we're doing. We're talking about leading strategy. It'll give you a taste of Amplifiers and a brief tour of the program. So whether or not you want to join Amplifiers, come along and get some deep insights into how to lead strategy better. Well, in the meantime, you know what? Live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.